Uh, hey, what's up?
Everything okay?
Hello.
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 Hi.
Hi, everybody.
There.
Oh, hi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Just
How
give everyone.
are you guys doing today?
Good.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Do all the official intros in a minute. Just give the attendees a couple more minutes to join us.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Is that Yinka Shonabar behind you, Brendan?
Absolutely right.
See? I attended a award ceremony, my first online virtual art award ceremony on Tuesday that was for it's called 1010. It's a Robinson Orr Prize for the government art collection in the UK, and Yinka got the award.
Well deserved. Very well
Yeah.
deserved. I've been a longtime fan of Yinka Shonobori's work, and I figured, I switched my backgrounds up, and I felt that, all things considered, it's a great, installation, and it sounds like you guys are based in the UK.
Yes, yeah, and actually
Perfect.
my
Perfect.
very first client was the Stephen Friedman Gallery that represents him. So
Cool.
yeah, I'm also a fan. I've been to many a private view with his work, and
Excellent.
Freeze visiting their booth and everything. So yeah,
Very cool.
it's good stuff.
Excellent. Excellent.
Emily
Yeah.
says, I worked at a museum that did a Yinka show in a historic gilded mansion. Oh, Gilded Age. Fantastic.
That sounds fun. That's a nice juxtaposition for you. All right.
So, let's see, maybe give people another minute.
Sure.
Now, Kalani, am I saying that right?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, just making sure. Brendan, I can, I think that one's fairly straightforward.
Where is Kalani from? The name?
It's a Hawaiian name.
Cool. Very neat. Are you Hawaiian? Part Hawaiian?
I am not Hawaiian, no.
Okay. Did you choose that name for yourself, or did your parents?
My parents chose it, yeah.
Oh wow, that's
I'm
cool.
a love child, so there's a little bit of the aloha spirit in me, let's just say.
Ah, that's nice.
That's sweet. Where are you based, Kalani?
I'm here in LA.
It's where I'm from originally.
Oh, wow.
Yep. I've been in England for a long time though, since college.
All right, so I think I'll get the ball rolling, then whoever joins us, joins us. So hello to everyone who is here with us so far today. My name is Mackenzie, and I am with the team at ArtEvolve. And my name is not Hello, but you can call me that if you'd like. And today we have many guests with us. So we have a panel of three. The first is Kalani Nicole, who's the founder of Transfer. Then we have Brendan, and again, your last name. Will you say it for me so I don't mess it up?
Sieko. Brendan Sieko.
Sieko. Okay, cool. Great. Founder of Museum. And then we have Annika, who is our very own ArtEvolve CEO and founder. So we're really excited to have all of these wonderful, talented art technology people with us today, because they have all recently been honored in the ArtNet Fall 2020 Intelligence Report. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it was the Innovators issue. If anyone hasn't caught it, we'll definitely be making sure that we link it in the recording and highlights of this. And for those of you that have, it's all about trailblazers, dreamers, pioneers transforming the art industry, particularly in light of our recent circumstances here in the globe, right, of the pandemic. So I'd love for each of you to introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us a little bit more about you and what you do. So Kalani, do you want to go first?
Sure. I am based here in LA. Transfer is an experimental art gallery that I founded in 2013, so 7 years ago in Brooklyn, New York. And in New York, it was a brick and mortar, and it was all about experimenting with de-screening media-based artwork. So all kinds of experimental techniques, from VR, AR to web-based practices, algorithmic works, thinking about also just like expanded practice, so people using the internet for space of performance and engagement. So thinking about how to, create impactful installations within the white cube context of the gallery. And a lot of my practice moved from white cube to black box, and I painted my gallery black and started doing immersive projection. And I also have a background in technology. So I work for 15 years now as a user experience strategist. So I work with startups and institutions to help them think about user-centered design methodologies and building out thoughtful technology solutions. So those are adjacent practices. I do them at the same time. And so my practice is very hybrid in that way. I'm also part of something called The Current, which is a new way to think about museums and collecting. And maybe I'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit in this discussion. So thank you very much for having me.
Definitely. Welcome.
Cool, thank you, very interesting.
And Brendan?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm always excited to meet other people that are doing great, innovative work in the arts and cultural sector. My story and my journey kind of dates back to when I was around 11 and 12 years old, when I first kind of came across computers and became infatuated by this new method and medium for creating things. So before that time, I wanted to be an artist, an animator, or an illustrator. And so computers gave me this avenue to create new worlds and design. And by the time I was 12 or 13, I had taught myself how to program and taught myself how to design on these newfangled machines, and saw that as a way to kind of create things. And so I started my first company when I was 13 years old. It was a creative agency focused on designing and developing technology, primarily for the music and entertainment space. So it's always hard to see, but I'm a punk rocker at heart and an indie rocker at heart. And I cut my teeth on the independent music scene as a teenager, and then used that as a way to break into the music industry. So I was working with the likes of Mick Jagger and Katy Perry and Lenny Kravitz before I could legally drink. And that company, became a go-to agency in the music and entertainment space. But as I started to gain the economic independence to kind of see the world and to do new things, I found myself spending a lot of time in museums and galleries. And so in my late teenage years and early 20s, the art world and the world of art and culture really kind of blew my mind. And every day, even though I was working in the music industry, I was always thinking about, the ways in which technology could play some sort of role in the art world. And I had an opportunity come my way with a prominent Museum Mile cultural institution in New York City. And I took on that opportunity purely out of passion and, an eagerness to learn and to help this organization. And I started having more conversations with other museums and cultural institutions, and just saw, the trials, the tribulations, the frustrations, the notion that these organizations that are doing such great work and are the underpin for world's culture are many years behind when it came to leveraging, new modern tools to reach different types of audiences. And so a lot of those things culminated and compounded to me starting a new company in late 2014, which is when I started QZAM. And we are a company that helps museums, art and cultural institutions engage their visitors, members, and donors using the power of technology. So we constantly have our finger on the pulse of what's going on in the arts and cultural space, and have, you know, dozens of conversations per day with peers in the cultural space to really understand where the challenges are, and the ways in which technology can play a role in unleashing the power of the museum experience or the art experience. And that's kind of me in a nutshell. There's other things I could go into, but I think that probably gives a good overview without going too far into what Museum does and what we've been doing.
It's funny you mentioned being 10 or 11, and Kalani is talking about kind of doing it with screens, because when I was 10 or 11 in Los Angeles, my mother was a installation video artist, and I remember going to her private view, or when she was setting it up, and there was she was projecting her film, which was based on her dreams, onto a pool of milk that had a little dropping, so that there was like a ripple effect. And that was my first conservation thought I ever had, was what happens when the milk goes off? So there you go, full circle.
Yeah, I'm sure probably milk is not the most common medium for projection, if I'm right, Kalani.
Probably not.
Probably not. So Annika, why don't you give us a quick intro for those in the audience who maybe don't know you?
Sure. Well, so I had a mother artist, grew up in Los Angeles. My father's an architect, and so I was always interested in the arts, but I realized from a young age that I did not want to be an artist and have my paycheck connected to my kind of creativity. And so I decided to pursue, first I was looking at curating, and then I went on a European kind of odyssey out of high school, and discovered restoration in Italy, and thought that would be a really cool gig. I saw the Sistine Chapel when it was recently restored, and so I studied in England conservation. And then when I got to work at Tate, and I was like, huzzah, you know, I'm here, my dream job, I got stuck doing paperwork 90% of the time, mostly condition reports, in a very archaic kind of process and fashion, still on paper, you know, doing digital cameras being uploaded to network drives somewhere separate from the paper report, having to sign my name a million times. And draw a little key and say, you know, this squiggly line means scuff to me, and then read other condition reports that with handwritten notes in 3 different languages. So, and sign my name to this legally binding document for insurance purposes. So there was clearly a lot of need for innovation there. And when the iPad came out 10 years ago, I thought, you know, this is it. This is how we can do this. So, so I started interviewing people to understand what kind of specifications a tool like that would need, and tried to create an international industry standard in digital condition reporting. And we launched ArtEcheck about 6 years ago, and we now have about 500,000 reports in the system. We work with around 215 organizations globally. About 33% of our customer base is museums, and then the rest is a pretty even split between galleries, fine art shippers, and now we're starting to get on board a few auction houses as well, which is exciting. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell, I suppose.
Lovely. So let's jump into talking about our topic today, which is using technology to solve art world problems. Now, we all come from very different directions to this particular topic, which I think is going to be very interesting. So, sorry, I have a pet fly that's hanging out with me at the moment, so I apologize for the waving around my hand.
Italy for you.
Yeah. Well, it's still warm here, so I had to open the window. So, yeah, it's fine. So, Kalani and Brendan, you're both based in the US, and Annika, you are American, but you're based in the UK. So, how has the use of technology in the art world changed, say, over the last 10 years from, you know, maybe your geographical perspective and what you think globally?
Well, from my perspective, 10 years ago, I was working at Tate, so in a museum environment in the UK. it was pretty much your collection management system, email, and Microsoft Word, and that was it, and a network folder. That was your access to technology in those days. And I think, you know, slowly over time, it's turned into a not always very helpful kind of hodgepodge of internal processes, which are, you know, part analog, part digital, different systems being used that often don't speak to each other, lots of customized databases that are so custom that they can't be updated, and so become very like legacy, you know, 10-year-olds and 10 years since an update kind of systems that are a source of frustration for many staff. And also they feel like they can't take on anything new a lot of the time. And a lot of staff in museums, they also still, even to this day, although we've done a lot of educating about this in particular, feel like they should have one system that does everything, you know. And we've done a lot of educating about, you know, it's great to have niche systems that do one thing really well and then have them connect, you know, to other niche systems. And that's kind of what SaaS is all about. And also using agile technologies rather than waterfall technologies, you know, so that you're constantly kind of tweaking your system so that it actually meets, you know, real users' needs rather than just developing this whole entire platform based on what you think people might want, and then probably getting a lot of that wrong. So we've been doing a lot of educating the market about these kind of particular things for especially museums that we speak to, and also about kind of the value of standardized data too, because, you know, we went from everybody doing condition reports their own way to now we're trying to create a, you know, a standardized way of approaching them. And along the way, we get a lot of people saying, oh, but I want to do it this way, and I'm used to doing it that way. And so we have to do a lot of kind of, but wouldn't it be great if we were all speaking the same language, and then we had a beautiful standardized set of data that we could then question and get insights from and do analytics on. And that's one of the conversations that we're having a lot now. But I suppose the other thing is the cloud. There's a lot of adversity to the cloud when we first started out. And I think that a major shift I've seen in the art world is now people are finally, for the most part, a few mega artist studios and Middle Eastern museums aside, more comfortable or at least accepting of the idea that, yes, you know, they really do need to work with the cloud and it is beneficial. You know, the good outweighs the potential bad of that.
And Kalani and Brendan, what do you both think?
I'm so glad to hear that agile methodology and standards have finally arrived in the art world. That's like really good news. I work with some institutions, but more institutions who are showing media art. So I don't know a lot of the inner workings. I'm sure Brendan's really familiar with that trajectory. But one thing that you said that I really want to echo is this idea of like 10 years of legacy or 10 years behind. So when I entered the art world about 8 years ago, right, everyone was really into e-commerce. And I'm coming from technology, right? And so e-commerce has been happening for 15 years at that point, right? And so as I progress through my development with the art world, I feel like it's constantly kind of 10 years behind this really anachronistic relationship to tech. And they're always trying to like apply things to fit into Silicon Valley models and following trends, but like following it in kind of like on the far side of the curve. So first it was e-com, and then it was, you know, VR, blockchain became this huge thing. I traveled to Basel to talk about blockchain in the art world at Art Basel. And then it was AI. Christie's did this big summit on AI most recently. And since pandemic, like VR has come back, but people really mean 3D. They don't really mean VR, but it's like this new wave. So I feel like there's this kind of like trend chasing relationship that the art world has overall, and it always feels a bit behind. That's kind of my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's generally the case. I mean, if you teleport back 10 years and kind of put yourself in the seat, just even looking broadly from a consumer perspective or broadly from a managerial perspective, 10 years ago, your director of the museum, your director or CEO of the auction house or gallery wasn't on their mobile phone all the time. Maybe their kids were, maybe maybe their relatives were. But think about how far we have gone when it comes to the penetration and adoption of mobile technology, and that it's an everyday accepted thing. 10 years ago, the director and CEO of the Metropolitan Museum of Art did not have an Instagram account. But these days, we're living in a very different world where they do, and they're communicating across these platforms. They're reliant on these platforms. They understand them to a much greater extent, so they're more likely to allow those tools and capabilities and mindsets to become a part of their platform, to become a part of the platform that is a modern museum. And so I think even that aspect of adoption from, I don't want to say the term gatekeeper, but those who set the stage from the top down within the cultural and art sector are now on board with the power of technology. And of course, COVID-19 has accelerated that several years forward, but 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. Technology or your chief digital officer did not play as great of a role as they do today, where digital strategy, frankly, is just strategy. It's strategy for engagement, it's strategy for operations, it's strategy for revenue and sustainable finances. All of those things were not the case 10 years ago, probably weren't the case 10 years ago at even some large, enterprises in the for-profit space. But it's easy to say that where we are today, we're there. I mean, we're still many years behind, obviously, other sectors, but major strides have been made around the acknowledgement of the power of technology, both in the for-profit and non-profit side of it all. So if you're talking about galleries, auction houses, and fairs, it's very clear. And obviously the motives are very different. The motives are around revenue. And if you look in the nonprofit art space, primarily art museums and foundations, I mean, it's very easy to see just how important showing up in a digital capacity has been over the last couple of years. And even in the last couple of months and weeks, it's become, a do or die type of scenario, because you need these avenues. And when you need those avenues, when they are a necessity, not just an option, the way that we think about them changes radically.
I agree. And I think that thank goodness for the technology as a consumer is also all I can say, because I think that that's driven the art world a lot, is people saying, well, in my personal life, I use technology in this way. Like, why can't I do that in my work life? And I think, thank goodness, because we might be even further behind than 10 years behind the curve, if not for that.
Yeah, thank you, restaurants and hospitality and travel and tourism, for kind of setting the stage of how easy it should be to buy a ticket, how easy it should be to make a reservation or to do something.
And fashion. Fashion, I think, especially for the arts, I think when we're in the arts, we feel quite connected to fashion, and so that's also been a big help, I think.
Yeah. So do you think there's been any difference between maybe the US and Europe, or in terms of the adoption of technology?
Yeah, I think we've seen, so 45%, probably now 50% of our customer base is in the US, and even though we have no staff there. So I think that kind of speaks for itself. We definitely, and also pockets in like Australia, Northern Europe, I think places that you normally think of as a little bit more tech savvy and a little bit less averse to change. I definitely feel like we penetrated a little bit easier.
I mean, one of the things that I've observed, just looking at the US to the Europe kind of differences, kind of on a positive note, is there have been strides and efforts to kind of unify initiatives around digital literacy at a cultural institution level. So there's an initiative called One by One. It started in the UK, and it has made its way across the Atlantic by way of a partnership. And the whole goal is to bring, a level of digital literacy and professional development to the arts and cultural space that kind of, again, unifies, unites, and sets a level playing field for all types of organizations of different shapes and sizes. I mean, it's easy to say that the big institutions have played a role in kind of showing success stories, but they're the big institutions and they already have, they already have the followers and they already have the resources. But to kind of have like a ripple effect or a drip down effect where everybody benefits from having kind of baseline understanding. They don't need to have a fully equipped digital department to understand what's measurable, what is just sound strategy that has been proven time and time again, despite or agnostic to the geography or regionality. So that's one thing that I've noticed that's fairly new. I mean, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, that type of international exchange or cross-border exchange was less of a thing, and now it's starting to happen. And I think that's to the benefit of all museums everywhere.
It's interesting that you mention metrics. One of the things that I think would be really wonderful in terms of thinking about, the future and next steps for technology is if the art world is a lot more interested in analysis of data and metrics for, measuring success. An article that I often quote is by the ex-president of the American Art Museum Directors Association, Maxwell Anderson. He wrote an article for the Getty like more than 10 years ago called Metrics for Success in Museums. And he basically said, a generation ago, a museum's prestige was based on its permanent collection. Nowadays, a museum's prestige is based on its blockbuster exhibitions and its visitor numbers. And he posited that maybe that's really just because visitor numbers are easy to track. That's a disturbing thought. That would be what's driving museums and their focus. But he was saying, let's please, museum professionals, think about what we want to measure and how we can get at that data, which nowadays we can. There's so many different ways of finding, drilling down into data.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the, and I'm a huge fan of Max Anderson and very familiar with the Metrics for Success article. I cite it often as well, and I think it's a great piece to read for anyone who's trying to understand and dig a little bit deeper about, the almost abstraction that comes around measuring the success of a cultural organization, because it isn't as black and white as a business trading on the stock exchange where it's about revenue and all of that. But one thing that I think organizations, I do not think we will come to a universal agreement on what metrics are even measurable and accountable, vanity versus reality, I think in a lot of ways. But I think one metric organizations in the year 2020 kind of and beyond are going to agree on is the line items around digital engagement and technological engagement. And I think that is out of necessity due to COVID-19. I mean, I read hands full of annual reports, not only of organizations that I'm involved with, but organizations that I'm intrigued by the way that they're operating and the strategy behind them. And I know I've seen over the last couple of years, like website views and downloads and social media follows just on like a handful. And I feel like this is the year where your board and your leadership isn't going to have the ability to say we have groundbreaking records around our attendance for these blockbusters or otherwise. And for your art fairs, it's going to be the same thing. Art Basel, Miami is canceled. So you're not going to have that metric to be able to point to the number of people flowing through physically, tickets sold.
The OVR is still around though, right? So yeah, it's going to be all about
exactly, and
what
that's
that
online.
can do.
That's online. Exactly. So those are the types of metrics that I think everybody is going to agree on, which are non-fudgeable. Like those numbers are black and white. The amount of time people spend on one of these pages or in the online viewing room, or just the number of hits and clicks and impressions and shares. I think we're going to start seeing a lot of that on annual reports. And you know, that's an interesting metric to point to kind of in the modern era.
Definitely. And speaking of annual reports, one that I read with interest last year was Tate's, and also some others over here in the UK, because I've been working with Julie's Bicycle, an initiative that was before the COVID epidemic called Art Goes Green, but I think we're kind of morphing it and changing it now. And so anyway, the works with museums to measure on sustainability and to measure their carbon footprint. And so something that the Arts Council over here has required that museums include in their annual reports now is their carbon footprint. And so I think that that's going to be another thing which is going to continue. And I'm hoping, I've been speaking with Julie's Bicycle about this, about how we can drill down so that it's not just, you know, our carbon footprint is this big number in tons that we don't understand what that equates to, or you know what we can do about it. But actually, it's looking at, for example, the amount that we're spending on having rigorous climate controls in our galleries, and if we adopted the Bisweight Green Protocol, you know, how much carbon could we save per year, and how much money in our electricity bill could we save per year, and you know, what would that look like over time? So it would be great if we can start to drill down in these things. But I agree, I think online engagement and also sustainability and environmental stuff is going to be.
I love Brendan's point about that it's not fudgeable. You can't fake these numbers. And I think like when we talk about metrics and when we talk about standards in general in the art world, because of the lack of transparency overall in all of the mechanisms that the art world consists of, we have a really hard time building, I think, meaningful understanding because of that sort of inherent status quo. And I really loved what you were saying, Anika, also about defining new values and new ways of measuring our success. And a lot of the work that I'm doing is thinking about new value systems that maybe are also not about just money and profit and ROI. And maybe there are other ways to think about getting back to the world where, yeah, the collection of the museum was cause for celebration. Like that's really what we valued, right? So those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about in the future.
That's really interesting. I've also been thinking a lot lately about how serving society, you know, is such an important thing for museums in particular, and you know, the art world in general. And right now, you know, museums are going through a real crisis. I mean, everyone is going through a crisis, but you know, museums are, I think, feeling it particularly keenly at the moment, especially over here. We have furloughing is enabled until the end of October. So I was just today speaking with someone very high up in a major art institution who was talking about, you know, how there's going to be loads of redundancies before Christmas, and it's, you know, a scary time. And so when museums are thinking about, you know, their priorities and their focus, I think, I don't know if you read about it, but the chairwoman of the ICOM, the International Council of Museums, stepped down recently because they couldn't agree on a definition of museums. Mm-hmm. And the modern definition that she was proposing was that museums are serving basically of society, and of, you know, that they're dealing with diversity and the climate emergency and all these kind of topical issues that we face that are so important to so many people, and museums kind of can't decide, is that our focus, is that who we serve, or do we serve our donors? You know, that's where the money's coming from. They want new acquisitions, they want their names on new buildings. Do we need to build a new building, or do we need to adopt the Bisweight Green Protocol, or, you know, do we need to, you know, deal with diversity, or, you know, we can't do it all because we're a museum, we have very limited resources.
Yeah, I think you raise an interesting point around environmental, social, and corporate governance, or ESG, as commonly kind of referred to in the business world. Where like that's one of your reporting metrics, and that's something that's made front and center. So I know in the business world, or in the tech world and startup world, you know, often you'll see something like a B Corp, and there are things that you are accountable to, that you report on, that are very transparent around those items. And that becomes really, really important when you make the claim around your societal impact, because you want to show your inputs are solid and sound, and your outputs are solid and sound. And so I think 2020, with everything that has taken place with, you know, social and racial injustice, workers' rights, and all things up and down every single area of life as we know it being flipped on its head. I know, you know, organizations are looking for their place in the world around what they're going to really focus on. And I mean, you could imagine that if someone is a director or someone who works in fundraising and development, they're really going to want to latch into the societal impact they have, because that's top of mind. That's an uncomfortable and frustrating, you know, and frightening place that a lot of people are thinking about right now, where if you're able to connect to that and really showcase the positive societal impact that you're having, or the positive environmental impact that you're having, whether directly or indirectly, those are things that, you know, took a long time to get there in the business world. And I know in the business world, was it last year or this year was the first time, I can't remember the name of the roundtable. It's like the global business roundtable is the first time CEOs of, you know, global 2000 companies and Fortune 500 said, maybe our purpose isn't just revenue, it is having a positive societal impact. And the quality of the workplace environment and how we treat our people, our employees, matters, and our impact on the environment matters, and our impact on society matters. And so that's a big jump to make in the for-profit world. In the nonprofit world, that's less of a jump, but I think we're going to see more reporting. And I think that's hopefully easier to report for organizations that are on, you know, on the good side, not the evil side, if you will. But it'll be interesting to see how it evolves.
I think this actually brings us on to the whole thing about, you know, the future of technology and how it can help the art world. Because, for example, you know, just like a very logistical, practical problem, museums normally are working 3 years in advance with their exhibitions, you know, because there's so many logistics for these major international blockbusters. And they have a real hard time, you know, pivoting and changing, but they're being forced to because of COVID. And one of the things we're hearing about that is forcing their hand is a concern over international loans. There's going to probably be a lot more regional loans, you know, a lot more local loans, which means that they don't need to necessarily have such a long lead time for their planning purposes. And maybe they can, you know, like organize a show in a year rather than 3 years, you know, possibly with the aid of technology, you know, like Vistari we had on last week, for example,
Yeah.
is a platform that matchmakes private collectors and institutions for loans in a technological framework. And I think one of the great other things that technology can do is democratize the art world, you know, which is so opaque, as you mentioned, Kalani, you know, and again,
Yeah.
Vistari as an example, they're basically taking the black book of the curator and putting it in the hands of everyone online. And there's something really wonderfully democratizing about that.
We need to do that for the dealers. I love Bernadine and her project, and we've had a lot of really interesting conversations. I love the ethos of what she's doing. Yeah, and I think like when I think about the future of the art world and what I see immediately in front of us, it's around the status quo of both scarcity but also wealth. And like it or not, wealth inequality is falling out of fashion right now, and it will be the great undoing of the art world. You mentioned democratization. I don't know, I think there's a lot of things implied in that term that are kind of problematic, but it's clear that, you know, we're thinking about our institutions, the crisis of ethical funding. We're thinking about the largest social justice uprising in the history And, you know, thinking about how online space and virtual space becomes this new public art space. And I think there's a lot of potential there that people are really sort of just dipping their toe into. Institutions are just starting to explore. They're really broadcasting a lot. They're not understanding how to bring people together yet, which is something that I've been exploring this summer with a fun project. But I think that that space of like MMOs and video games, these sort of online public spaces, the experience you have when you're in a Discord where you're sharing sort of virtual space and audio space in a fluid way that the next generation is really accustomed to. I think these kinds of things are going to give all sorts of subcultures and avant-gardes their own autonomy to rise. And in the meantime, the art world is kind of be a snake eating its own tail and just kind of falling apart and undoing itself. So that's part of the future that I see. Yeah.
Really interesting. Yeah.
So what do you think is, I mean, there are a variety of challenges, right, that could be solved with technology, but Brendan, what would be your number one?
My number one thing I don't think there is a number one because there's so many different areas of focus. I mean, like looking at the unsexy platform of financial sustainability, I mean, museums are sitting on a wealth of data, about their constituents, about their collections. And so to be able to unlock the value and power of that data so that they can be more financially sustainable, I think there's a lot to be said there. So that's kind of on like your CRM ticketing system of record, if you will. And I know there's a lot of work to be done there, and there's a lot of things, education and literacy around that notion. Obviously, artificial intelligence and machine learning is going to play a really interesting role in all of that. It's foundational. I mean, if we look up and down the hierarchy of needs, that's foundational given the financial difficulties and challenges being faced right now. If you look at engagement kind of as one of the other nodes, I mean, the way we socialize, communicate, and see the world and understand ourselves and understand our experiences has radically evolved, where the smartphone plays a critical role there, and the way that interacts or impacts the art viewing experience, the exploration, the learning, the context is very clear and has been for the last couple of years. I think the new nodes for artistic experience or experience around art and culture remotely or on site, I mean, you would have to point to mixed reality, augmented reality, and virtual reality, which have been thrust forward due to everything that has happened where the physical reality doesn't exist. So you need to look to the avenues of virtual and augmented reality and other forms of that nature. But I think, I mean, there's so many complex areas, and I will say that the rapid advancements that are happening just in big tech in general are making it easier and more accessible for some of those realities to be tackled, where you get 90% of the benefit for 10% of the effort, because the tools are either open source or they can be easily incorporated into platforms like QZAM or like your platform, where it allows you to bring it to market faster and allows you to put it into the hands of cultural institutions faster and more affordably. So I really believe in the power of platform and the power of all of the things that are happening around us in the tech space.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm curious if those in the audience have a particular challenge that maybe they don't think is the biggest one, but they're passionate about. So go ahead and share that with us in the comments in the chat. There's the ability, just make sure you put it to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see. So William Brown has brought up the concept that how the art world and its losses have been assisted by technology through rapid worldwide sharing of images, aiding art recovery. That's an interesting one, how technology can help solving challenges.
Absolutely, and it's another good example of why the cloud is so important. And in the art world, there's so much concern over privacy and confidentiality and security, which are all, you know, good things to have healthy concerns over. But I think that in years past, sometimes it has kind of inhibited and stopped people from exploring and engaging with technology because of fears and really education over, you know, what the actual kind of exposure really is in terms of security.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the area of, you know, trying to think of the best way to answer this, because of course there's the loss, you know, if you're looking at looted art or lost art, and then there is the art that was maybe taken through colonization and other such means, and then you know, areas of just lost and stolen art. And I have a little bit of experience in that area by way of an experimental project that my team led, where we returned stolen artwork to the home, essentially, of the world's largest single art heist, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, using augmented reality. And what we didn't realize when we were doing that was it would spark greater conversations around the role technology plays in restitution and repatriation and other such topics in the art world, you know, where the Association of African Museums issued a statement, and other organizations started to really think about, even when the museum in Rio de Janeiro burned to the ground, the role in which technology could play, not only in the preservation, but the rediscovery of those works in their original scale using augmented and virtual reality. So again, I kind of go back to that notion that the things that are happening in AI and AR and VR and other such things are unlocking opportunities that no one ever thought possible 10 or 20 years ago. And I think that's a beautiful thing when you're looking at the preservation of culture, and you're looking at the sharing and the distribution of culture in ways that just wasn't possible 10 years ago.
Absolutely. I went to an event last year in Venice on the island San Giorgio Maggiore, I think it was, and there was a Factum Arte have produced a facsimile, which is a type of repatriation as well, of a massive looted wall painting in one of the churches on the island from the Napoleonic Wars and all the looting and theft that took place there. And it's still in France, you know, this painting. And he was talking about how they chose to keep things like this big crease across the middle of it from where it was, you know, taken off the wall and folded and shipped out, and because they wanted the whole, you know, history of it, kind of warts and all. And it is fantastic that technology can help us to deal with some of these long-standing issues that we have in the art world.
Yeah, even things like 3D printing, right? We now have seen instances where we've actually, you know, recreated, physically speaking, using technology, art pieces that either have been lost or moved. So
I think it's really interesting the way you're discussing sort of technology being used to visualize some of these issues, right? And like bring them to the forefront. And yeah, contemporary art is a visual medium, but I feel like that is sort of indicative of the way that the art world uses technology over and over again. And I feel like it's maybe a way where we think that technology can solve problems, but we don't actually think about the problem in a deeper human way. And oftentimes we're throwing technologies at things as if they would be a solution, but there's maybe a better way to think about it. So when we think about the issue of like extraction and colonization around museum collections, one of the things that I'm really interested in is how can a collection be distributed so that the works that are collected might remain in the places where they were either stewarded or made or curated or shown. And this is one of the principles that the current is sort of, this project that I'm working with is based around these kind of inversions of the power structures of the art world. And I think that when you solve problems in that way, which again is not about technology first, but is about the problem or thinking about the problem in a different way and a different relationship to it, you can then apply technology to forward new values in the world. And I would love to see more of those kinds of engagements and projects in the art world, where we're not just kind of like playing with something or demoing something or applying something in a way that it's been used before, but really pushing our thinking about the structures and the power that's at play in those technologies and in our own institutions, and trying to move things forward in a different way. And I see a question about blockchain, which I think is like,
yeah,
one of these things where the art world has been trying to like put a blockchain on it over and over again forever. And it's like
a Band-Aid. Yeah.
we're like, oh, it'll suddenly be a market for media art. It'll be amazing, you know, because now we have a way to deal with scarcity around, you know, ephemeral art objects, around digital artworks, right? But the problem is that there's no market, like there's no people in the world who want to own and love these things yet. So by making a mechanism through which to trade them, it doesn't really solve a problem. So I love this question because it's sort of about labor. I don't know if you want to read that, or if you guys want to
Yeah,
read.
so the question that came through was about if blockchain can be used to solve the precarity of artists and art workers. So we actually had Ori Gerst on, and he has a platform that essentially is like a non-profit platform to allow artists to have a space that doesn't, you know, take commission from them, things like that. And that's his own personal project. So we'll make sure that we link that for those who are interested in watching that webinar, because that's the way that, you know, technology is being used to sort of create these spaces where artists have, you know, the ability to, for others to become aware of them.
But I like what Kalani was saying about kind of, you know, taking a step outside of the box and really, you know, reevaluating things. And I think that one of the opportunities that we have with COVID and these times is to do that. You know, we are being forced to make massive changes and to really, you know, reduce costs hugely and look at, you know, different revenue streams. And, you know, this applies to the nonprofit as well as the profit sector. And it's really a great opportunity for us to do some really thinking massively creatively and outside of the box of how things have been done. For example, when I read about this, the AAM surveying museums and finding that up to 1/3 of US museums are in danger of closing their doors forever in the next year. And I was also listening to a podcast about the Met and comparing it to Smog, the dragon, for kind of hoarding treasure and gold. And it was talking about how they have like 1.5 million objects at the Met. They have so many objects that their own curators can't get access to the objects because they're in such deep storage. They talked about this Islamic curator not being working there for 3 years and never having seen a single thing in the Islamic rug collection that he's the world leading, you know, expert in because of how deep storage it was in. And I was just thinking, you know, if the Met would lend all of its stuff to those regional museums that are struggling, you know, they might stay afloat. And it is a great thing to think about also from an environmental point of view. You know, these museums have hundreds of thousands of objects in storage that no one is ever going to see. They have a massive carbon footprint. They haven't even taken the steps to adopt green protocols that have been around for 10 years. And, you know, they have the air conditioning on 24 hours a day. Tate Modern, one building, it's not even the storage facility, that one building has the carbon equivalent of 28,000 homes. One building, and they have 7. You know, so this is a big problem. But, you know, museums don't feel like they can focus on these things because they're so focused on going after those donors and, you know, getting the new acquisitions, adding to the problem, building the new buildings, you know, these things that they've been doing for 20 years. And it's like, it's time to shake up museums, frankly. They do need to change their kind of priorities and how they think about things. So this is an opportunity, but of course it's a very painful process. But I do think that technology can really help in terms of thinking back to basics. You know, what is a museum here for? Why is the art world here? Why is art important to society? What are the goals of these things? What do they need to do for us?
Yeah, and then what you were saying before, Kalani, about the quality issues around it and just not having technology be the Band-Aid. Something, as you can tell, that we've been talking a lot about lately is sustainability, partially because with ArtEcheck and condition reporting, we've been looking at figuring out how to, do a project that allows us to actually get the data to prove the protocols work rather than just saying they work, right? So, and so we had Conserve on a couple weeks ago, and so they kind of come into the mix for that. They do sensors, so kind of all sorts of exciting things. And one of the things that came up, kind of came up for me that I didn't even think about, until we came onto this topic, was that when you're thinking about moving even just blockbuster exhibitions worldwide, if you have really strict climate control sections in your lease agreement, or in your lease agreement, in your lender agreement, then in that case, a lot of countries can't get that blockbuster exhibition because their museums don't meet the climate control protocols, which of course is going to be mostly museums in the Southern Hemisphere. And in which case there's really that, again, that issue of equality of access, right, to the art.
If we could jump back on Tunmuk's question and kind of remove it a little bit from the blockchain element, because I completely agree with the sentiment that Kalani left us with about kind of the the hammer looking for a nail type of scenario that we fall into so frequently. I think if we're looking at the kind of the income and the equity around artists and creators and arts workers, Swizz Beats, believe it or not, put out a really interesting piece around these ideas of equity, shared ownership of works after the transaction had taken place. So if you look at, you're an artist, you have a gallery, or maybe you don't have a gallery and you sell a work, where we are today, you have no skin in the game. The transaction is over, meaning there's no residual income for you as things evolve. And I imagine in the future, with advocates for these concepts like Swizz Beats, looking at how we can create sustainable careers and opportunities for artists and creators, if things of this nature will become more commonplace, where there is a little bit of equity in the work that continues on past that initial transaction, which will surely benefit everyone involved, because there is it's a fair approach, but it's an equitable approach. And I think that's something that can happen without blockchain. And it's more of just a fundamental and philosophical shift of how we value the creator and the creation.
I think it's entirely possible that blockchain will be used in that capacity. I've been having several discussions around that.
I think it will be too, but I don't think it's dependent, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Sure, no, you're right. If there's a will, there will be a way.
Care about artist resale rights, we don't need a blockchain for it, right? So we have to do value work first before we do the tech solution work, right?
Well, I don't know what it's like in the US, but in the UK, we've got DAX. Yeah. Which is for artist resale rights and copyright as a artist kind of society, and they are looking at blockchain and other solutions, I'm sure, as well, for how they can more easily automate and manage those rights. But they believe that that many dealers are doing things in the correct and legal way. And I think in Europe, they have some good legislation around that. But I don't know what the situation is in America. Do you know, is it the same?
Well, we don't have a standard like that. But do you get a sense that there are many galleries? Like what is the support like from the contemporary art sector for those kinds of measures in the UK?
I think it's pretty good, although I'm sure it could be better, and I'm sure that people that are know more about it than I do will elaborate on that. But what and I think that part of the problem is that it's kind of an honor system at the moment. I think that galleries basically get in touch with DAX and say, here's your fee, I made this sale. And so that's great that they do that, but yes, it's honor systems are probably not ever the best solution when it comes to required legal fees for someone.
Yeah. So, wow, we've gone in a lot of directions on this discussion. I really appreciate it. I like it. It's great. And I think it is important, I think, that's part of why we sort of named this topic about technology you know, working towards solving art world problems, but it's not that technology, you know, is, you have to change the values first, as Kalani was saying. So that's really important to address. So I think we're gonna have to wrap up. I know a couple of our guests have to head out right at the hour. So
Oh, can I just quickly,
yeah,
from Nanette, it says, it would be ideal if technology was able to help conservators to avoid the evil necessity of restoration. And I just want to shout that out because of being a conservator and all. And I agree. And what Nanette is I think, alluding to is, you know, preventative measures, which are, you know, really about sensors, and that's something that we're talking with Conserve about doing, and we're really excited about, is actually bringing cause and effect together at last in a, you know, conservation kind of perspective, and that is potentially very exciting and kind of long overdue in the conservation world, but it's really challenging because historic buildings, you know, museum buildings can be very weird in terms of, you know, sensor reading and how you interpret those, and mapping the sensor zones to the objects, which is what we're going to be doing with our kind of pilot project with them, and then trying to apply that to reducing carbon footprints for museums. A lot of museums, you know, like the Tate that I mentioned with their annual report, they kept saying, you know, our major focus is going to be reducing that carbon footprint and sustainability. And of course, now COVID has probably changed their major focus, to be fair. But anyway, I think that it's, I just wanted to mention that one.
Yeah, thank you, Nanette. That was a good comment. So I appreciate Kalani and Brendan for joining us, and Annika, as always, thank you very much. We will link to hopefully all the resources we've chatted about today in the recording and highlights. And then of course, we will link you to Transfer, and we'll link you to Museum so you can check them out as well. And we look forward to seeing everyone. I think actually, we don't have anything for 2 weeks, so we'll see you at the end of October. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
And Brendan and Kalani, it was really great to meet you both, and I hope that we can continue our newfound friendship and knowing each other as fellow art tech folks.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. Be well, and until next time, bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.